So I made a video about a month ago about how the Garfield Park neighborhood was really going up, at least the way it seemed to me, even more than usual over the summer, although it's always, the hottest area of the city. But there's been a particular block, okay, which is popping up again and again and again. And that is the block between the 3800 block of West Gladys and Pulaski. Okay, so we're talking like a 2-block stretch, like Pulaski and Gladys over to like 3800 West. And this, is right there in the Garfield Park area. And this is an extremely hot block, man. Especially over the summer. There's been numerous homicides and shootings on that one particular block. Now, as far as the gang thing going on around there, that area is mainly traveling vice lords. And listen, I'm not saying on the west side there's a lot of random stuff that's not gang related. So I'm not saying that all this stuff is gang related. This video that I'm going to show you guys right here, this is of a homicide in the Garfield Park neighborhood that took place earlier in the summer, and they caught these 2 suspects on camera. This is the type of thing that you get in that area a lot, man. But I'll get to that in a second. So back on September 21st, okay, so about a week ago now, there was another drive-by. 2 boys, both 16, were critically wounded in this drive-by. And you'll see the location, okay? And then I'm going to go back over some of the other reports on that same block. There's a lot of gangs around there. There's B Gang is not too far from there. B Gang, I think that's a mix. It's like, I think conservatives and Four Corner Hustlers. I don't know exactly what all of them claim. I know some of them claim vice lords. I'd reported on that guy Keontae, who was covered in the documentary Last Chance High, who he had a B tattooed on his forehead, he recently was unfortunately killed over there. He had been claiming vice lord in that documentary when he was just a real young guy. But they said 2 16-year-old boys are in critical condition after they were shot on Chicago's west side Wednesday evening. That's last Wednesday. Chicago police said the teens were standing outside when a vehicle drove by and somebody inside fired shots on West Gladys Avenue at Hamlin Boulevard near Garfield Park at around 5:21 p.m. Police said one teen was shot in the head and the other one was shot in the stomach. The teens were driven to the hospital, where both are in critical condition. Video of the scene showed at least 24 evidence markers scattered across the street. So far, nobody's in custody. Area 4 detectives are investigating. Okay, that was a week ago. Now, about a month and a half ago, a man was shot and wounded, they said, Wednesday morning in the East Garfield Park neighborhood. The 22-year-old was standing outside around 10:53 a.m. when gunfire broke out, and he was shot in the back again in the 3800 block of West Gladys Avenue. He was transported to the hospital where he was listed in serious condition. Nobody was in custody, they said. Area 4 detectives continue to investigate. Then, about 6 days before that, they said a man was fatally shot in West Garfield Park on Wednesday night. These are all happening on Wednesdays for some reason. The shooting occurred in the 3900 block of West Gladys. Again, at 6:35 p.m., a 30-year-old man was on the street when an unknown vehicle pulled up and an unknown offender inside the vehicle produced a firearm and fired shots at the victim. The man was shot multiple times in the back and transported to the hospital in critical condition. He was later pronounced dead. Again, Area 4 detectives are investigating. Then, several months before that, this is in the late spring, like early summer, there was a mass shooting. At least 4 hurt, 1 critically. They said in West Garfield Park shooting. Chicago police are investigating after 4 people, including a 17-year-old boy, were injured in a shooting on the city's west side. According to authorities, the shooting took place in the West Garfield Park neighborhood on West Gladys Avenue. Now, this was a few blocks west of where those other shootings took place. This was over by, I think around Costner. The 4 individuals were standing on a sidewalk at approximately 2 p.m. when a person in a passing white-colored sedan opened fire. And you notice a lot of these shootings are not happening in the overnight hours. They're happening in the middle of the day, in the early evening, in the morning time. The 17-year-old boy was struck in the back and was taken to the area hospital in critical condition. Now, several other victims. A 27-year-old man was shot in the lower left leg. A 32-year-old man was shot in the left back. Both were taken to the area hospital in good condition. A 4th victim, a 39-year-old man, was shot in the back and was also listed in good condition. No suspects in custody. Area 4 detectives are investigating the shooting. Then, about this surveillance video. Police released this image of 2 men wanted in connection with a fatal shooting last May in the East Garfield Park neighborhood. And the pair is wanted in the May 22nd murder of a 27-year-old man named Devontae. He was shot multiple times on a sidewalk in the 3900 block of West Gladys. He died a week later at the hospital. And the suspects are between the ages of 20 and 30. Anybody with information is asked to call Area 4 Detectives at 312-746-8252 or submit an anonymous tip at cbdtip.com. So Area 4 Detectives investigating that one. And you guys can see the video here. The shooting actually doesn't take place on camera, but they come in and out of the frame. One of them is running with a gun. So again, 3900 block West Gladys. So you can see that block popping up over and over and over again. And again, a lot of this, that area, the park is right there. Okay, so it's easy to get away like through the park. You don't have to run, continuously past a lot of buildings and stores and stuff like that. So, it's a very dangerous area because the shooters can sneak up like that. And then, get away quickly through that park. So that's not a block clearly that I would be hanging out on at all. Pulaski to over to Hamlin on Gladys. For some reason, and again, I'm not snitching on anybody in this video, but for some reason, that block is very hot. Just lost Keontae, who's, he was claiming a vice lord set not too far from the north of that. And again, I'm not saying that all this stuff is gang related, not saying that at all. Some of this stuff I honestly don't know, but the area is very, very hot. So that much we know, and that's all we need to know, right? If we're not involved, that block is a no-no. Okay, block parties, whatever. If you got kids, definitely a no-no, man. I would not expect it to stop over there anytime soon. The Garfield Park neighborhood is a neighborhood that has a pretty interesting history. The way that it racially changed, like in the middle part of the 20th century, is kind of, I would say, atypical to how a lot of neighborhoods changed. It was due to certain construction projects, namely the Eisenhower Expressway, that were displacing people from that area. So that area originally, like going back to the early part of the 20th century, in the early days of that community, and again, we're talking about like really two communities, the combination of East and West Garfield Park. It was mainly Irish, German, Italian, Russian, and Jewish immigrants living in that neighborhood. So very eclectic. I know that might not seem, or be considered eclectic today because those are all white people, but back then, these groups were definitely ethnically distinct from one another and, kind of formed their own little communities and ethnic enclaves with their own shopping districts and stuff like that. So back then, that was definitely considered diversity, even though today we might not consider it that. But at any rate, there was a shopping district along Madison Street. This was like in the 1920s, and there was a hotel over there called the Guyon Hotel, which is now on the National Register of Historic Places. It used to overlook Washington. So according to the Garfield Park Community Council, and this is according to WTTW, shout out them, they said, quote, "The Depression in World War II took a toll on the community. By 1947, the area was so needy that a group called the Daughters of Charity opened a facility called the Marillac House to serve the poor." So this is when it was still, predominantly white. It was Jewish, Russian, Irish, etc. But they said that the Eisenhower Expressway, a decade later, displaced many people whose homes were torn down by its construction. And in the late 1960s, African Americans began moving into Garfield Park, while the CHA, the Chicago Housing Authority, built public housing structures. So it started to turn in the 1960s. Now that's a lot later than a lot of other communities turned in Chicago. The South Side started to turn black, like I would say, really going back all the way to the beginning of the 20th century, like early 1900s. A lot of those communities, like in Roseland, it used to be like Scandinavian immigrants down there. The Irish used to, obviously control a lot of neighborhoods on the South Side. They still, were deep in Bridgeport, Canaryville area, but they used to have a lot more neighborhoods besides just that. Italians, I mean, there used to be all type of European immigrants down there. Jewish, used to be a lot over on the east side. But that all started to turn like really with the start of the Great Migration, when black folks started to come up from the South. And that was more due to like the phenomenon known as white flight. Now that was complicated. I did a video on another channel of mine about the race riots of 1919, when a lot of conflict started to happen in the streets, mainly provoked by the white street gangs that were getting down on black folks and causing them to form their own street gangs, who then turned on each other. And but these street conflicts led to, like, at one point a huge riot between the Irish and the blacks. And at that point, a lot of whites started to take off. When blacks started moving to the area, this would mean that now rival gangs were in the area, and they would just flee. So that was, like I said, starting all the way back in the early part of the 20th century. So white flight sent a lot of those people out. On the west side, this was different. They were not leaving at first because of black folks. They were leaving because they were literally being kicked out by the construction that was taking place, and because of the poverty that was caused by the war. So they really had no choice. We've seen a lot of the communities now on the south side where a lot of Mexicans are moving into the bandos that are down there, like abandoned houses and stuff. They're buying up a lot of those properties in West Inglewood and stuff like that. It was a similar phenomenon to that. Like, those black folks are not leaving because they're afraid of Mexicans or anything like that. They're leaving primarily. A lot of them were leaving because of the crime that was there earlier, and then also a lot of them were just getting up and out. I mean, they're just making money, moving to the suburbs, moving to northwest Indiana. A lot of them are moving back south. You kind of see a reverse of the Great Migration taking place. A lot of people are moving back to where their families were originally from, down in Georgia, Mississippi, areas like that. But anyways, after Martin Luther King was assassinated, he had visited Chicago to help organize. Riots broke out in Garfield Park in the black communities, and on April 8th, 1968, this was just not too long after his assassination, only a few days after. The Chicago Tribune's front page read, and this is again according to WTTW, it said, quote, "Madison Street, a scar in the heart of Chicago." And a reporter named Robert Weidrich wrote, "This was the west side of Chicago, where for nearly 48 hours, virtually uncontrolled rioting and looting had raged in the flare of burning buildings. So the National Guard was brought in, and the Chicago Tribune counted at least 7 deaths tied directly to the riots. Much of Madison Street was devastated, and middle-class residents, they said, and businesses left." So once the businesses and the middle-class residents left because of the riots, it sent the community even further into poverty, okay? Because this thing, like I said, it has a snowball effect. It's kind of like a self-perpetuating dynamic when you have, riots that in some cases could be driven by poverty, or it could be, part of that. But in this particular case, it was like racially driven stuff, with the assassination of Dr. King. But that drives the businesses out, and then the communities become food deserts. A lot of times when people break down why communities are food deserts or business deserts, they put the chicken before the egg, and they forget why that happened in the first place. And then that dynamic kind of, again, self-perpetuates. But anyways, today, that's one of the most impoverished communities in the city. My first job as a substitute teacher was over at Marshall High School in Garfield Park. My mom grew up in that community, like mid-1960s. So it was already like that at that point. There were still a few white kids, but she was one of the only ones. And then her family left when she was a teenager. The area was turning very violent. The vice lords were really starting to take off at that point and starting to take control. It's still a beautiful community, man. Aesthetically, the Garfield Park Conservatory over there in that park is a really nice area, but that beauty is highly deceitful, because it's the most violent neighborhood in the city of Chicago, statistically, the Harrison District. It covers Garfield Park, and if you go, a little bit west of Western, off into some of the neighborhoods, you see the bandos, and you see the visual appearance of the poverty, and then that extends down into Lawndale, and I would say into the southern part of Austin. That's all just one big gang war zone over there now. I mean, it really is. Like, I don't know how else to describe it. The kids at Marshall, everybody has a family member, friend, somebody that's, been touched by the violence. As I was, mentioning in another video, 1 full percentage point of their population was shot a few years ago. I mean, 1 out of every 100 people was shot in just in that one given year. Everybody knows somebody. And it's, like I said, the type of community where, police don't even have time to investigate robberies or anything. It's only homicide. If it's not a homicide, like they don't even have time for it. So yeah, this is where you see a lot of the homicides, and now a lot of black folks are leaving there. So what's going to happen to the community after this? I don't know. Most of the communities on the south side where blacks are leaving, Hispanics are moving in. And whether or not that'll happen in Garfield Park, I don't know. Humboldt Park borders it, so there's a heavy Hispanic community in Humboldt Park, and whether or not they'll take over what's happening in Garfield Park will be interesting. But whites are moving into the not the eastern part of Garfield Park, but the community just to the east of that. And whether or not they'll start to move into the eastern edge of Garfield Park will be very interesting to see. I wonder if that'll happen. But you guys can let me know what you think in the comments section. But that's where Garfield Park is today. And Gladys and Pulaski has been one of the hottest blocks that I've been seeing lately. And again, whether or not that's related to the vice lords over there, I don't know. But that definitely is a big time gang war zone. And that's the only way I can describe it. There's your boy Winnie C. Report. I'm out.